Shalom and welcome to Journeying into the Word. There's a lot of interesting things that Jesus tells us in today's Gospel from John chapter 8, verses 31 to 42. And each verse provokes various food for thought. As you read and reread today's Gospel, you'll probably have to decide, are you Jesus' true disciple? Because Jesus says true disciples will continue following and living out his word faithfully. Another point for reflection from today's gospel is whether you consider yourself a child of God or are you a slave. You'd probably be interested to know that you need to claim your righteous place, a rightful place, your rightful place in God's household as God's son or daughter. Because today's gospel says slaves do not have a rightful place in God's household. Another key thing to reflect on from today's gospel is what is truth to you? Do you know the truth? Do you know that truth that can set you free? And as you can see, there's a lot to discover in today's gospel. So let's go verse by verse and see the significance, the special significance in some of its key verses. For a start, if we say we are Jesus' followers, Jesus says in verse 31, the more you believe in Jesus, then the more you will follow his word, and the more you'll be his disciple. One proof of it will be we will believe in him and follow him and his words. And the question to ponder on today and ask ourselves is, do we? Today, if you can, let's reflect on what is the truth Jesus was talking about in verse 32. And to guide you, remember, the more you follow Jesus, the more you'll discover what's that truth he was talking about. And the more that truth will set you free. As we reflect on verse 34, we ask ourselves, are we perfect? If not, then do we agree that we do commit sin? And if we do commit sin, Jesus tells us in John chapter 8, verse 34, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. Hence, we are all slaves to sin. Now, being a slave is one thing, but look at what happens to those who sin. They are considered slaves, and therefore they lose their place in God's household, as stated in verse 35 of today's gospel. Only God's children who are on the side of the truth have a place in God's household. Hence, we need to cling on to Jesus and ask for his mercy. Then we will be forgiven and freed from the slavery to sin. And if we are forgiven, then we are free. And if Jesus frees us, then we are free indeed, as stated in verse 36. In verse 37, Jesus asks us, is there a place for his word in us? How much time do we set aside daily to reflect on his word and the word of God? One of the ways to honor the Father and his Son, Jesus, is by honoring the word. How much respect do we give to God the Father's word, his will and wish? Today, let's reflect on how much respect do we give to God's call and His plan and purpose for creating us. For all of us who are doing what our flesh desires and what our body craves for, and for the attachments and attractions and obsessions of the world, the chances of getting into bondage and kept in bondage by the evil one is stated in verse 41, where Jesus says, "You are indeed doing what your Father does." And to understand this statement by Jesus, we need to look at John chapter 8, verse 44. That's 2 verses after today's gospel. And Jesus says in John chapter 8, verse 44, to the Jews and to us, "You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father, the devil's desires. He was the murderer from the beginning and has nothing to do with the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies." And so let's become and be clear who is meant to be our real father. Let's be careful about the father of lies and cling on to the truth and remain children of the light to secure a place in God the Father, the Creator's household. Shall we keep all this in mind as we continue journeying and continue discovering more and more of the truth? For a start, let's go in search of that ultimate truth from today, so that we can become and be more and more free to rise and claim God's blessings, which He has prepared for His children who choose to live in the truth and whose words and actions are life-giving and pleasing to the Trinity. God bless you and your loved ones. Take care and stay safe.